Okay, so it's time. First of all, welcome everyone to today's discussion, in which we're going to talk about, as you know, the recent developments in Syria. Last Sunday, the Syrian Arab Republic literally ceased to exist, and a lot of developments have happened in the region, and with a lot of uncertainty. And so today we're going to have Alain Alamedine, who is member of the One Democratic State Initiative, and he's going to speak to us about the current developments and any insights about Syria. So I leave the floor to Alain, and then we're going to have a questions and answers. And we expect the meeting to be around 1 hour with 15 minutes.
Thank you, Raul, and I'm happy to see the faces of some people I know and see new names. So that's always good. And it's always good to hear that the Syrian Arab Republic regime has fallen. So it's first time I hear it in English, so I'm happy about this. So to discuss like a few developments, like what actually happened. How come a regime that was supposed to be so stable fell in 2 or 3 days? So what's important to keep in mind is the context in which this comes. So in the 70s, the Ba'ath regime took over Syria, and it enacted identitarian policies. So it imposed Arabism on millions of Syrians who are not Arabs, mainly Kurds. For example, that meant that they could not speak Kurdish. Kurdish was forbidden at school. They even renamed Kurdish areas and gave them Arabic name. So it shares some characteristics with the Zionist project. The difference is they didn't come from all over the world; they were already there, but it shares many characteristics with the Zionist project. So this obviously fragmented Syrian society. This government also gave privileges to the Alawites and several times massacred Sunnis. So again, common characteristics with the Zionist project. Eventually, Hafiz al-Assad died and his son took over, and he also opened up the country. The Soviet Union had fallen by then, and he opened up the country to neoliberal policies, which fragmented society even more and increased the already existing class divide. So, in this context, the 2011 uprising in several Arab countries reached Syria, and obviously, all the countries in the world basically wanted a share of this fragmented society. So there was Israel, of course, with behind it the US, but also Turkey, which is a regional expansionist force, Iran, which is a regional expansionist force, and Russia, which is a world global colonial force. And so we had these five occupations of Syria. And so they made use of an already fragmented society until eventually we no longer had a Syrian state. Like even regardless of whether we liked or not that state at the time of Hafiz al-Assad, there was an actual Syrian state. This no longer existed 10 years ago. De facto, we had Israel controlling a part of the country, the Turks in the north, the US in the east, and the Iranians and the Russians in Damascus and Halab. And this reached a kind of status quo where there was this tacit agreement between these five occupations that, okay, this is how Syria is going to be divided. And this changed a few weeks ago. Uh, we can only like yani, try to guess why, but there are clear indications on the ground. Three events happened on 3 different days. On one day, uh, Lebanon and Hezbollah agreed to stop fighting. The next day, the offensive started. And the day after, Zelensky said that he would be willing to recognize the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territory. And what's interesting is that the Russian Air Force, which played a major role in the survival of the Syrian regime, barely did anything to stop the advancing columns of HTS. So when we're talking about HTS, we're talking about 20,000 soldiers, most of them Syrians, some of them just mercenaries from other countries. But we're not talking about a major force that could survive, not survive, but that could actually take territory in the face of Russian air power. But they did that with almost zero Russian interference. And in a week, they basically took two-thirds of Syria, maybe. So this is what happened. Apparently, a deal where the US and Russia traded Ukraine for Syria to the benefit of two local players, the settler colony of Israel and Turkey, and to the detriment of another local player, which is Iran. What is our analysis of what happened? Um, First of all, we need to learn the lesson. If you've read the statement of the initiative, we mentioned something clearly that I'm going to read. We say that the Syrian dictatorship followed a model of governance that is based on destroying society's capacity to organize politically and relying on external legitimacy instead. And we're saying that this was a horrible decision, even for the regime itself that we don't like, or that we didn't like because now it no longer exists. We continue, we say, by weakening the society's capacity to organize against its regime, this model increased the vulnerability of the whole country, including the regime itself and even its decision makers on a personal level in the face of external actors. So the result was Syrian society and territory was dismembered over the past 10 to 12 years. The Syrian regime fled, and obviously those who benefited are expansionist regional powers like the one I mentioned, Israel and Turkey, and the colonial powers of the West and the East, so the US and Russia. Um, the future is unclear. Maybe one of the most, I'll mention two very positive developments. One of them is that the Iranian project that weaponized identities to fragment societies everywhere, like in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and Syria, to pit Shiites against Sunnis. This has proven not to have worked. Now, they don't all share analysis, but they all agree with us that it was a bad idea. This has been an occasion for many of the forces who used to be with Iran to contact us as the initiative and as allies in the region, and many people who also had been following our discourse because like the meme says, we were against Iran and the Syrian regime before it was cool to be against them. So they can see that this was what they were saying all along. And because we had anticipated this, we published a number of articles that was warning that the Iran thing um, wasn't going to work. So, for example, today many are saying that there no longer is an axis of resistance. But even before this, we were saying there is no axis of resistance. This is just Iran and the tools it's trying to use. And the moment Iran decides to either falls or decides to stop supporting us, then we are at the mercy of Iran. So this is a very good thing. Also, a number of so that's the first positive development. The second positive development is that Syrians are now getting the the chance to organize politically, and this is amazing. There's a political party we are on very good terms with. Um, Someone contacted us, or a number of people contacted us asking us about them. And I asked the comrade I'm in touch with in Lebanon, like, what do I do? He told me, send them my number. I asked him, okay, but what name do I give them? And he told me Samir, which is his real name, not his fake name. And I laughed. I said, okay. And he said, well, the regime has fallen. Now I can say my name. So you can just get a glimpse of the freedom that they now have. I don't know how long it will last, but something is happening. Numbers of Syrians are organizing. Literally, dozens have contacted us telling us we want to create something like the initiative, but for Syria. Also, the Syrians in the initiative who understand that this is really a common cause for the peoples of this region are now taking active action to help these Syrians organize. I have the impression that there is one more thought I wanted to share. Yes, obviously, the Israel had a hand in what happened, and the danger, the inherent danger that it poses as an expansionist colony, showed, because the moment that Syria had some kind of a power vacuum, they just took more territory. And I think this shows something, which is they took a territory 4 times as large as Gaza in a couple of days with zero resistance. They took 14 months in Gaza and they're still losing soldiers every day. So this kind of shows the difference between uh, the Palestinian resistance and the Syrian regime that claimed, it no longer exists. I need to get used to the past tense, that claimed to be part of a so-called axis of resistance, but never armed its citizens who lived 5 kilometers away from the occupation army. So the danger is still there, and the best way to face the danger of this settler colony is to, in the words of George Habash, the best gift you can give Palestine is to fight against your reactionary regimes. And so Syrians are organizing to do this. And yeah, we just need to be as active as we can in helping this organization increase in strength, numbers, and capacity.
So thank you, Alon, for the talk and the insights you provided towards the situation now in Syria. So now I open the floor to any questions. So we're gonna have a conversation about it. So everyone that please wants to speak, raise your hand and I give you the floor. Ellen, please go ahead. Yes.
Ellen, I'm curious, and I don't quite understand what you're saying about who the progressives are in Syria. I mean, I'm very uneducated, of course. I guess I've been reading a lot of stuff written by Joseph Baher, who's a Syrian in Switzerland, if you know who I mean, who's a leftist, and he sort of says that the left was completely destroyed quite a while ago by Assad, and that really has no organized existence. So who are you talking about? I mean, or what kind of ideology or program are you referring to in terms of the people that give you hope?
Yeah, so I don't know the Joseph person you're talking about. I agree with what he said. The Assad regime destroyed the left completely in Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. Destroyed, co-opted, fragmented, or a combination of the above. What happened is that there is now, this is my personal point of view that I think most of the comrades of the initiative share, or those who are on the Syria file share. There's only one organization in Syria that I would call a real leftist organization. I will share their website. They are called, let me just translate in English, the Revolutionary Left in Syria Current. They are Trotskyists, but they are not as rigid as most other Trotskyists I've met. I will share their websites on the chat.
Seth, please.
Well, thank you. Fascinating analysis. I'm curious if you could talk a little more about the Kurds and their situation.
Okay. Raoul, just one thing. Is this question and answer, or is this more like a discussion? I don't mind either.
Well, it's like as it goes. Maybe
Okay.
yes. We continue with the questions, and we can continue. If someone else wants to add something, they can raise their hand, and we have the discussion. Yes.
Tammy, I'm very happy to answer questions. Just I thought just to make it clear that if anyone was to say anything and that's just a question, they're more than welcome to. Regarding the Kurds, it's kind of complicated. There is a Kurdish-led autonomous government in northeastern Syria. They're called the Syrian Democratic Forces. They are supported by the US. So yeah, with everything that implies, obviously. And the SDF include Arabs. They have a parliament that also includes Arabs and other what they call minorities in the area, like Syrians and others. It's unclear. There is several question marks. So first of all, there has always been an identitarian attack on Kurds by Arabs, by Turks, by Persians. Like they have a history of this, and this went on with the current regimes, the regimes currently in place, and with the late regime of al-Assad. In northwestern Syria or northern Syria, there also is an army called the Syrian National Army. That's not really a Syrian national army. They're funded by Turkey and they hate Kurds. Even lately, 10 days ago, they tried to take advantage of the HTS offensive on Halab, Hama, Homs, and Damascus to ethnically raise 100 to 200,000 Kurds from such areas. It might actually be part of the deal because we have Kurds in an Arabic area and now they've left to a fully Kurdish area. So it's part of this. Again, it shares many things in common with the Zionist project. So let the Kurds have their own area and we Arabs have our own area. It's very destructive. It's horrible. I mean, it's horrible for them at the moment because like the 200,000 people had to leave their homes, and it's horrible on the long term because it strategically imposes the concept of having ethnically pure, like cleansed, really. Like we are Arabs and we cleanse the dirty Kurds to the east, and the others feel okay, great. So let's have a clean Kurdish area. Yeah, it's very destructive. One of the issues is that some of the Kurds are behaving as Kurds, not as Syrians. So some of them are going ahead with like I'm not they've had their share of oppression, so I'm not judging in any way. But instead of saying this politicization of identity doesn't work, and we need to live together as people living in this territory, regardless of whether we are Kurdish or Arabic. Some of them are saying, okay, let's have our two-state solution, and they can have their Syrian state, and we can have our Kurdish state. And what makes this a bit more complicated is that there is such a thing as the Kurds. Like we're talking about tens of millions of people who are living in one geographic area. So one could make the case for a Kurdish state as well, and that would not necessarily be identitarian. Just like, there's a case for a French state, and there's a natural border between them and Spain, for example. So this makes things even more complicated. I don't know if I've clarified the picture or made it even more complex, but it is actually complex.
I'm sorry. Hello. I just want to comment on the Kurds. I think the big mistakes when the Bilad Sham was divided, They didn't count on the Kurds. They didn't give them land. They give everyone, every ethnicity, every a piece of this big sham, but they didn't count on the Kurds. And I think they do deserve to have their piece of land where they can decide for their self-determination. In other words, this is my opinion about the Kurds. And maybe this is the time, and also I've heard something really worrying about that where they are. There is a dam where Euphrates, there, the water. If they get to blow it up, whoever blows it up, Syria will get flooded, and Iraq. So there's big dangers now in terms of this dam that's in that area, the northeast part, where it retains part of the dam. So I think this is one of the very worrying things, situation, that Syria can get flooded, and as well Iraq. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, yeah.
I
It's
came
always an
late. I
issue
don't know
with
if you did mention this point, and it's something that
No, I
worries
didn't.
me.
I didn't. But yeah, you're right. This is always an issue with large rivers. There's the same with Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Um, okay, let me give the Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt example. There's one river, like the Nile, that extends from Ethiopia to so Eritrea and Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt. These are four countries. I'm not saying they should necessarily be one country, but here's just an example. Eritrea is not part of Ethiopia because Eritrea is majoritarily Muslim and Ethiopia is majoritarily Christian. And Sudan is divided from Egypt, but like there's a straight line, you know, it's drawn with a ruler because Sudanese are darker skinned, like they would be counted as black, whereas Egyptians would be counted as brown. I mean, there's one river and a single interest for everyone. So when we say that identity is something very personal, if you could, for example, okay, let me give another example. Sudan was divided in two, South Sudan and Sudan. The British occupation and colonization of Sudan actually um, weaponized identities there, and they entrenched the concept of identities on three levels. One of them was pitting Arab Sudanese against African Sudanese. But like, what is the difference? Like, if I'm in Africa, I'm African. If I speak Arabic, I'm Arabic. So why is that two different identities? This is something that they created, the British created. They weaponized, or they even created a different identity, which is not created. They created the Arab versus African thing, but they weaponized something that was already there, which was by pitting Muslims against Christians, against pagans, or like what we call pagans as monotheistic religions, and they legalized tribes. So before the British, there were just tribes, like basically large families or groups of families, and the British took note of which tribe each person was from. And to show that this identity was a construct, at different stages of history, the British had a different number of Sudanese tribes, which means that for example, in 1930, I was of tribe X, but in 1940, I was of tribe Y, that the British had just created based on something that was somewhere in the area. The result is that there were serious societal divides. We eventually had an Islamic state there. Then the Christians wanted independence on the basis of identity, and so they got that. So now there is South Sudan, which is still not Ethiopia because they are Christian Arabs and the other are Christian Africans. Like, I'm not sure what that means. And a couple of years after they took their independence on a sectarian basis, they had a civil war on a tribal basis. And a couple of years after that, which is now, like a few years after that, which is now, Sudan is fighting on a tribal basis. And this never ends. It never ends. Because even what are we going to do now? Divide South Sudan between tribes and divide Sudan between tribes? But the moment this happens, they will find another intertribal identitarian thing. And this is, by the way, one of our arguments against the existence of Israel, because we say even if you succeed at raising Palestinians from the area, and like you normalize with all countries and Israel becomes a normal country, because you have chosen to be a Jewish country and to have this to have it on the basis of identity, you will have intertribal fighting, which is what we've been seeing over the past few years between religious Jews and secular Jews. They're even fighting over the definition of what being Jewish means. If this continues, it will lead to a civil war or a separation within Israel, like the one that happened within Sudan. And it won't even end then. They will find something else and even your countries, the US, the UK, France, you're headed toward the same. So to go back to the Kurds, I'm not saying I necessarily mind Kurdish independence, but if it's done on the basis of identity and not on the basis of like actual administrative practicalities, which can include, of course, common language and of course geographical proximity, if we're not in a state of rupture with this concept, with this ideology, they're headed for a momentary independence. They will head for another civil war or another fragmentation. Even today, Kurds in the autonomous region in Syria are not on good terms with the Kurds in the autonomous region in Iraq. And sometimes they don't even speak the same language. So there's this huge overlap of politicized identity with interests and really keeping identities out of like not politicizing identity is really necessary. And I haven't even spoken about the imperialist and capitalist component that adds up to piles up over identities. Sorry for the long explanation.
Does anyone have any other comment about it? Or another question to continue with the Monihan, please? We cannot hear you, Monihan. So someone else?
Yeah, not so much a question as a comment. And I think Elaine has mentioned this in one of the posts. In America, what we're hearing is our government saying, oh, this is a chance for a real democracy and for freedom. You know, everything that they are denying to the Palestinians and so many other people, suddenly that's their priority. And I just think that hypocrisy is amazing.
So I'm sorry. So what's really the formula to go back and live all together, all these different ethnicities, like federations. I heard Ilan Pape saying that we have to go back to the way people lived under the Ottoman Empire, all different ethnicities, but not living under the Ottoman Empire. All different federations, different groups, communities. What's the formula at the end? What would be the ideal way of all these different cultures and religions living together again? How would it be? How can it be?
I just like to comment before handing the word to Alain. I think that as the initiative, we clearly say that the only way forward to avoid this sectarianism is the establishment of democratic and secular states that do not deal with the people on the basis of their identity. That's really like the political framework that guarantees these problems from not being to not persist into the daily lives of the people. But Alain, would you like to give a better response?
Better no, but I can add to it. يعني I don't know how clear this is on our website or on our platforms. The vision we're talking about is not just a vision for Palestine, and not just for the Sham region either. It's a vision from the world for the world. As we understand it, what I was saying like a few minutes ago, all societies of the world virtually are headed for fragmentation, and we often give the same examples. Like one of my favorite examples is the 2022 poll in the US, where 45% of US voters say that we should split the US in two based on whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, which is a two-state solution for the US. And we are seeing this fragmentation, for example, in Europe. The right is always siding against the immigrants, but the left is always siding with the immigrants, and they are using identitarian logic. So, for example, let's say there's an area where there are Arabs or Muslims, and there is a high drug high high there's a high rate of drug abuse and selling drugs. I forgot the word. And so the right will come and will say, okay, these migrants are a problem, and here's the data on drugs in their areas. So let's just have our white Christian country back. The left will say, no, they are not the problem, and immigrants are welcome. But nobody actually tackled the actual material reason, like why are these people taking drugs and why are them selling drugs? I don't care if they're Muslims or Jews or vegans or whatever. They have a drug problem. Why? Well, obviously now we're talking politics and we're going to discuss what class they are from, what kind of what they earn, and what kind of education they're benefiting from, how good the infrastructure where they live is, how easy it is to find a job. And this is where we tackle issues, including sometimes limiting immigration if that's what's best for the socio-economic situation, but not on an identitarian basis. But what we're seeing is state after state and movement after movement adopting identitarian logic. And so to go back to Amal's question, what is the formula? There is no like one formula. There's no copy-paste formula. There's a vision, like we are presenting an analysis of how there's a colonial structure that is global and that weaponizes identity and that is capitalist at its core and that needs to be dismantled. Now, what it means to dismantle it in Lebanon is different from what it means in Palestine and different from Syria. So, of course, it's different for Spain or the US or Mexico or Zimbabwe or whatever. What needs to happen is for political movements, and this is why, if you've noticed in our publications, we don't talk about solidarity, we don't talk about activism, like we're not against these, but the problem goes deeper than that. We talk about political organizations that analyze the capitalist and identitarian relations of power in their society and adopt policies or propose policies that dismantle these relations and to actually work to impose these different policies that will structure society in a different way. So again, I'm sorry for talking too long, but to give an example, a recent example in Lebanon, Israel targeted one sect, basically. 95% of Israeli strikes were on Shiites. But they did something that's amazingly smart. Like it's cunning, it's evil, but it's smart. When they would bomb Shiite areas, most of the time they would tell them in advance. And so Shiites got the chance to leave. And because they are targeting Shiites area, the Shiites went to non-Shiites area. And now I'm talking about Shiite areas. Like, how is an area Shiite? They're trees and rabbits. Like, the trees and rabbits are not Shiite. But now we're talking about Shiite areas. And somehow it makes sense. Like, all of you here on the call think that, yeah, it's a Shiite area because they're Shiites and they're being targeted. So this is a case example of politicizing identity. And where being a Shiite is no longer about the way I pray or what I believe. It's about where I live and being targeted or not. So they left for non-Shiite areas, and 5% of Israeli bombing targeted very specifically a building where Shiites lived in a Christian or Druze or Sunni area. What happened is that after that, many Druze and Sunnis and Christians did not want to welcome Shiites. Not because they have a problem with Shiites, but because this puts them at risk. And so this is an example of an actual policy, an Israeli policy that weaponized identities and that caused the fragmentation. So this is a case in point. So they did not have a formula. Like, this is not a formula that Hitler used and that they copy pasted. They created this policy because they analyzed the relations in Lebanon. And they thought, okay, you know what? This is going to fragment Lebanese society even more. Hella. There is no ready counter formula. There's no prepackaged solution. But one of the solutions would have been for the Lebanese state, if we had a state instead of having a conglomeration of sects, to have buildings in a specific area, to have under the ground bunkers, to have aerial defense that could shoot down Israeli planes, to have an efficient rocket arsenal in the Lebanese army that could threaten, if you're going to do that to our people, then we're going to do the same to yours, so stop doing that. We didn't have these. So we didn't have these policies, and they enacted their policies and they have succeeded. So Amal, this is just to give an example of how there's no prepackaged solution. We need to do this analysis for each territory. I can do it for Lebanon and Palestine, but others need to do it for their own countries. Again, I'm sorry for taking too long. I generally like to give shorter answers.
Okay, so we move on to Monihan that wanted to comment.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool. Well, I mean, just to add to what Alan was just saying, I think we also have to remember, because there is no clear model or whatever, there's no cut and paste for our side and trying to sort of attack this identitarian shitstorm that's everywhere. I think we also have to remember that we've all been sort of raised and sort of breastfed on this kind of logic. I mean, it's sort of hard to even think outside of identitarian kind of constructs, and to demystify that stuff takes a lot of work. I mean, you see yourself slipping into that logic just because that's, that's what we're all raised with. So it's very tricky. And yeah, I mean, it's like you have to go into, you sort of have to dig at the root, because it's very easy to snip things at the stem and then they just grow back. But to get to the root of it, it's like constant history lesson of like, who started this? What were the power dynamics at play? Why did it start? It's like they're always marching forward with it, so you have to constantly be fighting back, and it's a lot of work. But yeah, it's huge to think about this stuff, and it's a constant struggle. But the thing I wanted to talk about was going back to the Kurdish stuff. You had sent out in your Substack an article from, I'm gonna totally mess up the pronunciation of her name, but Dilar Delik, and she had some very interesting things to say about critiquing her own previous work about the region and about the Kurdish struggle. And I wanted to know if maybe you could sort of discuss that, Alan, because I think it's pertinent to what you were saying before. Maybe.
Sure. Raoul, I don't know. I think Farzin and Ellen had things to say that were directly relevant to like what I was just saying. So do you want us to continue this discussion and we go back to the Kurd thing?
Yeah, sure. That's perfect.
Yes, it's okay. We hear their comments and then you are able to formulate the answer for everyone.
And
Farzin,
everyone, please look at Amal's cat. Farzin, you're muted.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. What did you say, Alan?
I
Yeah.
just said that everybody should look at your cat.
My cat. Yeah. Why? The.
Because he's very cute. He's just looking at.
Mhm. Oh my God. Yes, she bothers me.
What
It
does
Bothers
it
doesn't
me.
bother us.
So I actually had another question. And I have been learning about Korea lately, and how exactly South Korea became what it is. I mean, they had like actual fascists trying to do something, and supposedly this democratic state, and like, how did that happen? And it really comes down to like a US occupation, right? So is there any chance, like you mentioned all the different occupations of Syria, is there any chance that that ends up really happening? Like Israel is taking more and more land. I don't know if they plan on annexing it or if they like making it part of Israel or if they plan on making another South Korea type situation. How do you perceive that happening? Do you think that the rest of Syria will end up under another occupation? Like, how do you foresee the occupations changing things?
I
Ellen?
think Ellen, yeah.
Yes. Ellen, can you give us your comments, please? Ellen,
Oh, I'm,
yes,
wait.
go ahead, please.
No, I took my hand down. I was gonna
Okay.
postpone myself. I'm postponing myself.
I'm sorry. So, Alan, you are free to answer.
Tamam. Okay. I'll start with Moni and the Kurds because we had already started this. The article by Dilara is excellent. I will also send it on the chat for those interested. I don't know Dilara, but one supporter shared the article. She is doing a self-critique of the kind of support that she had for the autonomous region in northeastern Syria. I don't quite remember. I might say things that she's not, yani things that were said by other people. But there is a critique to be made. For example, Rojava is often spoken of as an anarchist success, but it's not anarchist, and it's not a success by the standards that that anarchists and us would share. For example, the Kurds did engage, not the Kurds, but like some major Kurdish forces did engage in ethnic raising also. Like there's an Amnesty International report about this kind of raising. Also, it's an actual autonomous region, yani, with I think that this concept of decentralization sometimes it hides the actual relations of power happening. So, for example, if there is an this is an example about how capitalism can enter the picture. When there is a billionaire who owns or a few billionaires who own let's say 80% of business opportunities in an area, decentralizing actually hands over all the power to these few billionaires, because okay, the power is in our hands as the people, but the people are working for 3 or 4 people, and if we take different decisions, then we lose our jobs and we lose our livelihoods. And so decentralizing is actually goes hand in hand with helping these people. So it's not as simple as power to the people that's decentralized. This goes back to what I was discussing with Amal, that there is no formula. In some cases, the solution is to decentralize, particularly when the actual relations of power are centralized somewhere, which is generally not the case in capitalist societies. So this is part of the critique that needs to be made of this Kurdish, we call it the Kurdish experiment in Arabic, but like the autonomous region there. Another thing that Dilara talks about is the relation that this northeastern autonomous region has with the US. Like the US is an imperialist force that really couldn't care less about either the Kurds or the Arabs. They care about the oil that is there, and the oil that is in the region where in a region close to the demarcation line, if I can call it, between the Kurds and the Arab tribes in the areas, who are always bickering, but they're never fighting the actual occupation. So again, this shows how identity is being manipulated. Of course, there are arguments like the Kurds will say, oh, but the Iranians are helping the others. And this is where, you know, we come in to say, well, someone has to break that cycle, because if my taking help from the Russians legitimizes your taking help from the Americans, then, you know, we might as well divide Syria. And this goes back to First's question. So again, there needs to be a break somewhere. And this is where, to go back to the role that people in Europe and the US can play, standing in solidarity with us doesn't accomplish much. Like it's warm, it's fuzzy, it's a hug, it's a virtual hug. But again, I will quote George Habash again: the best gift you can give Palestine, and in this case, the Kurds and the Arabs in Syria, is to fight against your own capitalist regimes.
Ellen, please.
Yeah, well, as Ellen knows, I'm a communist. I belong to the Progressive Labor Party. And I mean, I completely agree with what he's been saying and some others, that we do need to have identity, but the identity we need to have is that we're a member of an international working class, and that we're opposed to a national imperialist and capitalist class. And if we don't all over the world gain that kind of identity, then we're kind of doomed, because every society in the world today is a capitalist society. I mean, we have the big imperialist ones, but even Palestine, Lebanon, even the Kurds, they're all capitalist societies with their own ruling classes. And they're, you know, some are the large imperialists and others are kowtowing to them. But all these countries are run the same way. And one of the comments I always make about the ODS policy is that we not only have to call for unity between various groups, we have to talk about how society is organized, because to have unity between, well, you sort of do in Israel-Palestine, you have unity between the corrupt Palestinian Fatah capitalists and the Israeli capitalists, both oppressing workers of Palestine and even the workers of Israel. So unless you're talking about building an international working class movement that's actually going to fight for a communist society, then we're all sort of doomed, because these capitalists eventually they start fighting each other, and that's when we end up in world wars. And it seems inevitable that we are going to, probably sooner rather than later, end up with massive world conflict between the forces loyal to China and those loyal to the United States, in which many of us could end up being exterminated. And of course, the problem with when you say I'm a communist and we need to fight for a communist society is that when you look at what happened to previous communist revolutions, as in, you know, the Soviet Union or China, they all devolved into capitalist societies, which we would not want to emulate today. And I totally agree with that. There are no communist societies in the world today. And I think they made big mistakes. You know, they thought that communism was something that would be achieved in 100 years, not quickly. And so they gave into a stage of socialism, which was half capitalism. And they gave into ideas of nationalism, and they gave into the ideas of uniting with the progressive bourgeoisies. And these ideas all turned them into their opposite. That may not have been predictable, but we can see it in retrospect. And so we have to try and avoid those mistakes and build a communist society differently. But that's the problem in the world today, that if we have loyalty to any of these imperialist or their societies or their, you know, lesser nationalities which have loyalty to them, then we are doomed. And that's why I hope that in Syria, in Palestine, I wish in Lebanon, wherever, I wish only for the that a left arise. And unfortunately, in the United States, there are a bunch of parties that call themselves leftists, whose analysis is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they support China. They even were in support of Assad. One of these parties, the Workers' World, came out with an editorial about what a tragedy was that the democratically elected government of Assad was overthrown, believe it or not. And they cheer on anybody who's defeated or fought against the United States. Well, that's not enough, because the bad guys are on both sides. So we have a big job in front of us. But I think if we don't have that perspective, then we're all sort of doomed. But hopefully people will be coming to that outlook. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. And Jasper, I see your hand raised. Go ahead. You are muted. We cannot hear you.
Okay, you hear me?
Yes, yes. Now
Okay.
it's...
I have to preface this remark with the fact that it's my second time on a video with ODS, so I'm not an old-timer as many of you are. And I must say, I'm kind of like looking for a different type of long-term activism. And I feel like ODS has a kind of like goal, like one democratic state. So I'm thinking that maybe that would be something for me. But whenever I join, especially today, I feel like I'm very confused. I'm confused by the use of identity. And I'm a little confused by the wholly different type of discussion that I feel like you guys are having from other groups that I'm involved with. And I wonder, like, especially like the comparisons that were made, like with identity, for instance, the Kurds versus, I guess, other groups in Syria. There were comparisons made like, oh, it's similar to in Israel. And I wonder, like, is that really the case? Like, one is an identity, a group identity versus another group. Yes, sure, it's a problematic and it has a long history. But like Israel is a truly a Zionist colony imposing itself on Palestine. Like how comparable is it really? And isn't like identity in a way like also red herring that's being discussed here? Like all those like identities, yeah, they are important, but they were living together in some ways bad, some ways good. But before the Civil War broke out, there wasn't like a war. Yeah, maybe I'm out of bounds here, but I just don't really get the whole notion of like bringing everything back to identity, whereas I think colonialism is the real cause of the problem, and colonialism is really clear in Israel. And yes, I realize that all of the states in Middle East are the result in some way of colonial divisions, but none of them are settler colonial regimes like Israel is. And that's sort of my real, like, I get like really confused in these discussions. That's it.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Jasper. Raoul, shall I answer Farzin and then Jasper?
Yes, please. I was going to say that.
تمام. Let me just share my screen. Okay, can you see my map of Syria?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so Farzin will ثواني just a minute. Okay, تمام. So Farzin was asking about the different like might Syria be actually divided. هلا in this map there's so there's this area here. So this is the Israeli occupation. This is the US occupation here. The yellow is the Kurds, basically, and the Syrian Democratic Forces. These areas here this is the Turkish occupation. These areas are the old HTS strongholds. The red area is the regime before it fell, so like last week. And so basically this now is the regime. Oh, just a minute. Okay. So this now is the regime. So if we view it this way, there's the regime in the middle, so Syria. Then there's Israel here, the US here, the Kurds here, and the Turks here. This region here is being targeted by the Turks. So the purpose would be obviously to have all of this as a Turkish area. In these regions, there is armed violence, so like they are attacking Kurds and others. But also there has been a Turkification. So you can see Turkish flags, the army there, there are Turks and mercenaries bought by Turkey, like Uyghurs, Turkmens, others. And like even schools have the Turkish flag and they teach Turkish, and some of them even include maps of Turkey with this section as part of Turkish territory. So this is the Turkification of this area. To go back to Farzin's, like directly to go back to Farzin's question, like might this become part of Turkey? It's already becoming part of Turkey for like 10 years now. It's already the case. They've already started doing this. So really, what's new is that more people are seeing it. About the yellow area, the Kurdish area, we still don't know what will happen. Now, there are two major Syrian components, which is the regime, HDS, and the Kurds. There's going to be negotiations over this. It's very complicated. I don't think, like, I've heard 10 different analysis of what's happening, all by people like I trust, either in the initiative or close to it. So, and like I'm talking about actual politicians. So I don't know. I don't know what will happen between these two. If we can actually have one regime, you know, that I mean, they cannot fight the Turkish occupation, and they're also supported by the Turks, so I don't think they will fight this. But if we can have one Syrian regime that doesn't discriminate between Kurds and Arabs, that's already a good thing. But then we have to wonder, like, what kind of policies will this regime? So we don't know what will happen. As for the other occupations, which is the US here and Israel here, there is no armed capacity to fight either the US or Israel, and they are in almost, I would say, full alignment with the other occupation, which is Turkish occupation. So I don't think there is any hope of getting rid of these. There is a slight hope of getting rid of the US occupation if they're, they pump out all the oil and the rest becomes fully aligned, then they will become like official US bases. Yeah, like they are in other regions, other areas in the region. So yeah, so long story short, we now have the three main occupations. Israel, Turkey, the US, they are aligned. We don't know how fragmented the region will be. Fazin, do you have any other question? Like, did I answer you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, really, I was wondering mostly what happens with the US, like if there's any chance that they leave or if they support, Israel annexing more. But I really appreciate the context about Turkey too, because yeah, you're right. Like that's not something I really knew much about at all. So it's really good to hear about that and something else I can read about.
Yeah, I use this to mention a few things. Like the 200,000 Kurds who were ethnically raised from their lands, probably none of you have heard about it, unless you focus on the Syrian thing and you actually read about it. But nobody cares. Like Western media doesn't care. Western media cares about what's happening in Gaza because on October 7, the Palestinians in Gaza killed white people, basically. But otherwise, it wouldn't have made the news. The same thing would have happened as in Sudan or in Congo, where millions are dying, and nobody even knows that a genocide where literally millions died in Congo. Nobody cares. Had Congo killed 1,000 white people before, then people would have cared, and less Congolese would have died. I mean, really the colonial situation, the global colonial situation is horrible. So even the Turkish occupation, nobody mentions it. Like, why would they mention it? They're just, barbaric brown Muslims fighting against each other as they always have. This is how it's dismissed.
Morihan, please.
Alon, did you want to answer Jasper first before I talk?
If you're going to say something else, yes, I would like to answer Jasper first.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to go back to something that Ellen was saying.
Okay, tamam. Jasper, I really like your comments. We can also have like a one-on-one discussion because I'm sure that I won't tackle everything you've mentioned. No, but I will answer. But we can have a longer discussion afterward because I think there's a lot of give and take here. So you were saying you mentioned difference with other groups, so I'd like to hear more about this. So when we talk, I'll ask you again. Regarding the Kurdish issue, and when I said it was similar to Israel, I don't know if maybe I was inaccurate. What I meant was that when the Syrian government or like previous government um, forbid teaching Kurdish and forced the Arabization of Kurdish areas, this shared this shared aspect of the Zionist project. I did mention it wasn't settler colonialism in the sense that they are all already Syrians living in the land, but it does share a very important component. And in a way, from a certain aspect, if you were a Kurd living in your town and an Arab comes from 100 kilometers away and forbids you from talking Kurdish and says that this is an Arabic town, it's not very different from a Palestinian living in a Palestinian town, and then a Jew comes from not 100 but 1,000 kilometers away forbids him from being a Palestinian and says that, you know, this is a Jewish area. It's very, so I agree with the distinction you made between colonialism and settler colonialism. Like, I really agree, but we shouldn't discount the other aspects of colonialism. They are very much intertwined. I'll give a practical example. The resistance in Lebanon decided to be an identitarian resistance. So Hezbollah decided to be, the people that became Hezbollah decided that we're going to be the Hizb of Allah, like the party of God. And they said clearly, we are an Islamic Shiite, Ithnai Ashari, like even a subsection of Shiite party. And this was in line with the Iranian policy. Because they fought Israel and they had astounding victories in year 2000 and year 2006, the whole Arab world supported Hezbollah. Like there are pictures of me at the time with flags of Hezbollah. Never mind that I'm not a Shiite, but you know they are the one who actually won against the enemy, and they proved it was possible. Because of what happened in Syria, which is that a Shiite regime in Iran supported an Alawite regime, killing tens of thousands of non-Shiite and non-Alawite Syrians, and displacing, not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and displacing millions. To give a small comparison, half of the Palestinians are outside Palestine, but more than half of Syrians are outside Syria because of that war. So like, okay, it's not settler colonialism, but I mean, look at the results. Like it's very, because of this, many Sunnis in Syria, those who were young in 2006, who were 10 years old and didn't really understand what Hezbollah was, they were 16 to 18 into 2011, when Hezbollah, you know, started entering and waging a war with the Syrian regimes against the others. And they ended up hating Hezbollah and even hating Shiites. So I'm not condoning this in any way, but when Israel killed Nasrallah, they were happy because he is the person who had killed them. These are the children of those who were waging Hezbollah flags. I, for one, who have not been personally harmed, or not even anyone like I personally know has been personally harmed, I who used to wage the Hezbollah flag, now I don't wave it anymore because, you know, I've outgrown this identitarian logic. But not only that, I mean, when he was killed, to me, there are two Nasrallahs. There's the Nasrallah who fought Israel, but there's also the Nasrallah who did to the Syrians what Israel is doing to people in Gaza. And I have very mixed feelings about this. So as you can see, to reuse your words, identity isn't a red herring. It's actually an intrinsic part of colonialism. Like colonialism feeds on us versus them. And it specifically and deliberately uses not identity per se, but the weaponization or politicization of identity to create an us versus them that fragments societies and that causes the defeat of the colonized. So
Yeah.
there's a large number of Arabs who no longer support Hezbollah because of their identitarian violence. And one of the results of this, you can see the difference between how long Hezbollah withstood against Israel and how long Hamas withstood against Israel. Hamas, in a tiny area with maybe 50 times less military capacities than Hezbollah, is still fighting again after 14 months of genocide. Lebanon could handle 2 months, and then, you know, they said, that's it, that's all we can do. So this shows how weakened we are because of this identitarian divide. Without it, we would have actually won the war, really. Like Israel would know, if we hadn't been divided, Israel would no longer exist today, and we would have a Palestinian state for all its citizens, just like we've always wanted.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I meant with red herring. It's sort of like, if we buy into it, we lose.
Okay, so we agree that identity is the red herring, but buying into it, so politicizing it is the root. Yeah,
Yes.
this is what we're saying. I will
Yes.
also share a link about this, and like we will talk about it again, you and I.
Yeah.
Yes, Monihan.
Thank you.
Wait, did Jasper want to say something else?
Yes.
No, that's good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, back to further divide and conquer, situations. I wanted to go back to something that Ellen was saying. There's a real, because the sort of so-called left, especially in the sort of social media sphere here in I don't know, the global north, and especially because there's so many sort of how would you describe it, like a new to consciousness kind of fired up, but not really deep thinking kind of social media influencer left, that's very vocal. They do have a real problem with the concept of my enemy's enemy isn't necessarily my friend or whatever, so there's a lot of infighting going on right now because people don't have a good analysis of what this situation, because there's moving parts, and it's tricky, and I just don't think we can discount or downplay the degree to which having a very clear and well thought out and well argued narrative about this situation in Syria, it could very easily disrupt a lot of the progress that we've made in articulating what the fight is for Palestine. And I don't know, I think I just would like to hear other people's thoughts about that. I don't know if people are as glued to the sort of social media sphere as I unfortunately am, but it's I mean, it's probably just a sign of everywhere else too. I mean, you see it in the like more leftist media channels too. You see a lot of confusion around this stuff, and I'm just, it's just a thought. So and I think it's important, but yeah, I don't know what to really say about it, but I just wanted to bring it up.
Thank you, Munihan. We're going to continue with Simon and then Satnam, and to be able to go and wrap up as well.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. But I was going to, I wanted to bring up something else, but what Mayan mentioned, I think is some, I wanted to ask about something related to that. So the whole my enemy is my enemy's, the enemy of my enemy is my friend thing. I think that's kind of like, that is a big problem. I agree with that. I think it's complicated. What I was going to ask about essentially is it's complicated because I think what happens is it's a reaction in part to facts on the ground and realities on the ground kind of thing. It's not necessarily the desired state. I mean, I'm not pretending to read into the minds of every single person or involved in a movement or something like that, in one of these movements. But I think it's complicated by the fact that people are doing their best to, within the context of events that are unfolding on the ground and various reactions of different groups and pressures to different situations. And so I think I just wanted to put the question to just the broader group of like, how do you deal with the whole the enemy of my enemy is my friend situation in a long-term way when situations that you're facing in the moment make it very hard to do that, when it's very hard to think about a very long-term strategic mission when it's deep into the horizon rather than right in front of you, or something that feels kind of actionable. And then I had a different thing to bring up, but I'll wait till later because I want to like keep a conversation going about the topic that Mani started.
Hello, would you like to comment something on Simon's comment?
Yes, so Moni and Simon, I think what Moni said, like there's infighting because we don't have a clear analysis is on point. That's the answer, I think. I'll give an example. So people are saying, oh, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. No, he's not my friend. Well, how about my enemy is my friend? In some cases, yes. So for example, the Zionist project benefited from the Holocaust. So they thought, yeah, this enemy that hates us, he's our friend. And Herzl literally said the anti-Semites are our friends. So to give another example, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara armed their militia from the US. They said, no, we're not communists. We just want a non-corrupt government. And they took weapons from the US because they thought, you know, if I don't take them from the US, where am I going to get my weapons? The Soviet Union is 10,000 kilometers away. And they decide, so we can disagree with their choices. And I'm obviously not a fan of the Zionist project, but this is to show that they did not have, again, to reuse Amal's word, they did not have copy-paste formulas. They decided what to do, and we can critique what they did, of course. But it was based on an analysis. And interestingly, both of them succeeded. Like they both, like they created the settler colony, and the others, they took power. So we really need to. So what if the fight against imperialism takes priority? I don't know, that's something to discuss. So if you remember our statement on Syria, we do mention like the ethical stance that, you know, those who kill their own people will not liberate Palestine. We do say this. So I'm not saying there should not be ethics. The whole purpose of having a democratic state or even of political work is is human well-being and human dignity. So obviously there's a moral compass, but we made sure to explain why this happened. And this is something like I stated also at the beginning, like when a regime is based on destroying its own society and fragmenting it, it becomes incapable of saving even itself. It becomes reliant on external powers. And when these external powers make a different deal, like what happened between the US and Russia, apparently, they lose all capacity to do anything, whether that thing is liberate Palestine or get richer. So instead of having like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, no, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend, let's actually understand the underlying power dynamics and come up with a political vision. And this is why the initiative was established, because people are only reacting to the event. So there is infighting because we've never discussed it. Like the Palestinians and pro-Palestinians have never actually sat down, like, for example, in the US, there are people within PYM who supported the Assad regime and some who didn't. And I'm sure they've never had the discussion. And it would have been much healthier to have the discussion, understand where we differ, where we agree, work together where we agree, work against each other where we disagree. And instead of just saying, we won't discuss any vision, let's just talk about the genocide. Okay, but what happens when the Assad regime falls? Now we have infighting. It's just that we did not manage. We did not manage the differences because we haven't cared about the vision. And it goes further than that. Like even if you manage to stop the genocide, but you don't dismantle the capitalist structure in the US, the armament company, instead of sending their weapons to Palestine, they will send them to Sudan. That's it. You've shifted the genocide. And maybe it's even worse because you've shifted it from a place where there is media coverage because the Palestinians killed white people to a place where there is no media coverage because the Sudanese didn't kill white people. So like, let's really have a vision and have a long-term objective in mind. And then we can have this clear analysis, and then we can see where Iran falls within this analysis. Things become much clearer when we do this.
Sadna, if you have a comment, please. And also, we're going to go and wrap up as well afterwards, because we are above the time, please.
Right. Thank you, Alan, for speaking. It's been very informative. I wanted to go back a little bit. You know, I'm American, and I just wanted to go back to the 60s, 70s, when America did have a rainbow coalition of so to speak, of a leftist movement. It was a real leftist movement, and I think one of the things that America has always feared was a leftist movement started by a charismatic black leader. That's always been a concern because they've been able to, uh, you know, just a marginalized group that has been able to coalesce support amongst people of other identity groups. I think like when you look at the Black Panthers in America, the thing that crushed them was capital and the tools of capital, whether it's the police, whether it's the FBI, all of the different tools that come with it. So I guess my question is, we've seen in America both a leftist movement that crossed cultural boundaries and crossed cultural lines. We've seen that actually happen, and we've seen it have some success where they got the Civil Rights Act passed, Immigration Rights Act passed. That's paved the way for my family from South Asia to immigrate to America. But then they kind of shut the capital, kind of course corrected. They were able to continue the fragmentation. So I guess my question is, what is the through line for the region in the Middle East, for Syria, for Palestine, for Lebanon? What is the through line that could bring about this movement? And what are obviously there's capital that's crushing it, and there's identitarian things that are crushing it, but we know that it's possible. We've seen it being possible that the descendants of slaves could formulate in America, you know, something of that nature. So how do we support it? How do we look out for the things that are going to crush it? And is there actually a movement right now for this cross-cultural solidarity that is obviously going to be necessary?
Okay. Yani there's so when you're asking what the through line is in the region, one basic principle in radical change is that humans don't like radical change. Like we like our comfort zones. We can complain about things in our comfort zones, but we're comfortable with them. So for example, if you compare the number of Americans who would say, yes, we want more wages, most of them would say that. But if you tell them, how about a socialist state, that, you know, the number drops significantly. We don't like change. We like tiny changes, tiny improvements, but we don't like radical change. So societies resist radical change, like slaves resist freedom. Really, it's that we can see that in the very few number of Palestinians resisting, for example, in the West Bank or even in the 48 territories. Change, radical change happens when two things intersect. One of them is the current regime is in danger. So staying put becomes more dangerous than, or it feels more dangerous than change. And so we have more, we begin to accept change because our brain estimates that it's less dangerous now. And there is an alternative. So there is an organized political movement with vision, and that inspires enough strength for people to side with them. So when this happens, so people can change. To give an example that's not as political as what we're discussing, if my wages is very low and I hate my boss and my hours are very long, I will complain about it, but I will still until they are no longer able to pay me, and I can find a different job. When these two intersect, then I will have a radical change and, leave my work and have choose another job. So a recent example of this is what happened in Syria. Most Syrians don't want the Assad regime, didn't want the Assad regime, but they did nothing about it. But the moment that these two things happened, the regime proved unable to keep hold of territory, to keep hold of major cities. And there was an organized movement with a different agenda, which was HTS. People switched and they supported HTS, and they waved the new, let's call it new Syrian flag. So what needs to happen in the area is this, but instead of HTS having a secular and democratic movement, this is what we are working on. Are there such existing movements? If there were, we wouldn't have created the initiative. We would have just joined them with regards to Palestine. In Lebanon, there is. In Syria, there is. And we are in contact with these movements, either declared, like declared contact and alignment, or under the table for different political reasons. In Jordan, there isn't. There are individuals, and we are in contact with them. We are working towards having a larger alliance that can be declared in conference, if possible, in Palestine, if not in Beirut. So we will know more within the coming 6 months. We have started joint work, like at several, particularly for those of you who read Arabic. If you follow us in Arabic, there are significant changes.
Thank you, Alain. Munihan, a last comment?
Okay, so it's sort of been covered. Alon pretty much answered it, but I just wanted to go back to what Simon was asking, like how do you deal with when people say this? And in very practical terms, I have just sort of found what's worked for me as a sort of rhetorical strategy of first talking about what the world is that we envision and what we can agree with what we're trying to fight for. And once you have that baseline, then you can go into the into the weeds of, well, what does this mean for this regime or this change or whatever? And it sort of seems to help clarify, so you don't get into the sort of knee-jerk kind of reactionary arguments. And yeah, somehow if you just can take a step back and start the conversation by trying to talk about very precisely what we're fighting for, I think it can sometimes help in those conversations, just in the same way that yeah, I don't know. I was going to say something else, but I can't remember now. But yeah, it's sort of what Alon was saying, but just very, very clearly getting on the same page first before you go deeper into the conversation of the details. It always helps.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up. First of all, thank you, Alain, for all your comments, insights, and all the knowledge you shared today with us and about Syria and the region. And as well, I would like to thank everyone else that was present today for attending and for your contributions and your comments. And we will continue with this kind of meetings to stay updated on the situation as the developments unfold. And yes, a final thank you, and we wish to see you next time as well.
And thank you
Can
to
I give
Raoul.
one last concluding
Thanks,
comment?
everyone. Fascinating discussion.
Online, please. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, a very quick comment. I promise I will not take long. Like we are trying to get something done where we are, and it's very difficult to deal with most political groups out there because identity and capital. I'll give a small example. We try to work with the two main non-Hamas, non-Fatah groups in the West Bank on a West Bank project, like how to help these people remain steadfast in their land because, the genocide is coming there next. One of them did not want to work with us because we are against Iran. and the other didn't want to work with us ostensibly because they get their funding from Qatar, and we're not fans of Qatar either. So to be able to work with others, now there are groups that are like us, they're as radical as us, and they don't obey capital or identity. But in most cases, to be able to accomplish something, we need to impose ourselves, like to be there and, you know, start the thing, and people either have to join or be left out. So everything that you do in your countries for the initiative or with the initiative gives us, increases our legitimacy, increases our size, and increases like people hear about us, and the others take us more seriously. So yeah, just saying that the coordinating efforts helps everywhere. So what you're doing in your countries in this direction helps what we are doing in